This video was originally going to be a review of Guilty Gear Strive, because I love fighting games and I really like that series. But after I started editing, EVO happened and they announced Season 3 and a bunch of stuff in my script got outdated, so I decided to shelve the idea. Maybe I'll come back to it later, but no guarantee. So instead of Strive, I've decided to look at one of Guilty Gear's weirder, nicher titles. You know how I said I really like the series? Yeah, well I mean like 3 games, because Guilty Gear at its core is a fighting game series, but there's loads of extra media and strange spin-offs that most fans will just never touch, me included. There's novels, manga, drama CDs, albums, handheld spin-offs, beat-em-ups, slot machines, and Pro Jumper Guilty Gear Tangent, which is some weird DSiWare platformer. I'm not even sure how this relates to Guilty Gear. But we're not looking at a spin-off today, because believe it or not, Guilty Gear 2 Overture is a mainline entry, and despite being the 16th title in the series, it's the only non-update game that calls itself a sequel, even though it has almost no similarities to the entries that came before it. Now, there's a problem right from the moment you open the game. This is a port of an Xbox 360 title. A bad port. It's missing ranked mode, which I can live with, it's not like you're gonna get an online match anyway. The problem is what the port doesn't add. There's no control settings, so if you don't like the default controls, yeah, tough luck. You can edit the keyboard controls if you screw around with the .ini files, but don't play this game on keyboard, it's not worth it. The bigger problem is that they didn't add any graphics settings, which means the resolution is stuck at 1280 by 720. Though you might not even notice, because this game's graphics do not hold up well. When people think of Guilty Gear's jump to 3D, they think of the Exode series, which after almost a decade still stands as one of the most visually striking and beautiful fighting games ever made. But before Exode, there was Overture, and it didn't exactly come to 3D gracefully. Saying the graphics aged poorly feels a bit disingenuous, because there was some great looking games that released the same year. Oxys probably just didn't have that kind of budget. Another reason could be performance, because the game can have a lot of enemies and particles on screen at once, and since they wanted this to be a competitive game, ensuring a stable frame rate is important. I can't really tell you if it worked well on original hardware, but I can't find anyone complaining online, so I guess it was fine. The only thing that makes it a bit less harsh on the eyes is the good art direction. It's got the creative settings and character designs that Guilty Gear is known for. For some reason I really like the archipelago, probably just because I like beach settings. But these cool designs can often be let down by the weak animations and rough lighting. Okay, let's talk about the gameplay, because just going off the footage you're probably asking what the hell am I looking at? This game is pretty unique, it's a weird mix of RTS, MOBA, and 3D action game. This might seem like they just took some random ideas and threw them in a blender, because that's exactly what they did. But the resulting genre smoothie doesn't taste too bad. Your character plays like a 3D action game. The controls without lock-on are pretty simple. One basic combo, a charged attack, and a special move that costs meter. But when you lock on, your moveset greatly expands, where you can input different attacks by holding forward, backward, left, and right. There's a problem though. For certain moves like launches and specials, the camera will enter this cinematic side view. So quick question, you want to do forward plus X after this launcher. Do you hold up on your stick because that's the way you were looking before the camera moved, or hold right because that's the way Sol is now facing? Well, they were smart, so doing either input works. Unless you're doing a special move. For some reason, specials can only be input with the way the camera is facing before moving, so you always have to hold the stick towards yourself and ignore the way the character is facing. It's just inconsistent and makes me wonder why they had this cinematic camera in the first place, because all it does is cause problems. The combo mechanics are a bit hard to learn. There's no intuitive system like Gatlings that makes doing combos easy to understand, so you'll most likely have to go into training mode and experiment for yourself. Or go on Dust Loop like a normal person. Yeah, this game is a Dust Loop page. There's actually a bunch of random stuff on Dust Loop. You know they have a page for Kingsfield 4? Just in case I ever need to see the frame dot on Dwarven Sword. Special moves cost meter in Overture, so you can't just spam Gunflame into a choke point to clear enemies, and strangely supers cost a full bar instead of 50%. I'm not a big fan of this, since it means you can't end a combo with a super if you spend any meter at all during it. The trade-off is that supers are extremely strong, doing either absurd single target damage or being great for crowd control. Funnily enough, there's an abundance of loops in this game. Like half the roster has extremely strong loops that either do mad damage or end in a knockdown. I'm sure you can make some really cursed combos happen when you're near walls, but it would require a lot of awareness on what angle your opponent will bounce at, so I found doing combos in the open was far easier. Speaking of positioning, you move pretty slowly compared to the size of the map, so to compensate they added Blast Drive, which spends a bit of tension to let your character start sprinting. This isn't a normal sprint though, because it controls like a car with no brakes and flat tires. The turning is extremely slow, so they added drifting, but it's really easy to drift too hard and miss your turn, or just drift straight into a wall since these maps aren't designed to be racetracks, they're designed for MOBA gameplay. The stages are large, symmetrical maps of varying complexity, with a Master Ghost at either end. Master Ghosts function as your base, with the goal being to destroy your opponents while protecting yours. If you go down, you're out of the fight for a bit and your Master Ghost takes some damage. Die too much and you lose the match. There's also chests scattered around the map which contain all sorts of useful items like bombs, potions, and... Is that the pro jumper guy? Smaller points of interest called ghosts can be captured to generate more income. On set intervals you get given mana. More ghosts equals more mana. You can spend mana to buy items, abilities for your character, and dudes. Each character has their own tribe of servants that can be commanded around the map using the organ to help you attack positions or defend your base while you aren't there. Now if those terms like ghost, servant, and organ sound familiar, it's because Jacko's moveset in Revelator is actually based directly on the gameplay of Overture, which is also why her dust moves are one-button specials that cost meter. The main type of troops follow a rock-paper-scissors type advantage chart. You'll have to carefully strategize which units to buy, whether the cost is worth their impact, and how to position them effectively around the map. Or you can just rush them with drills and queen, that works too. Now I'm gonna be honest, I have no idea how balanced or well designed these systems are. I'm not a huge RTS guy and I never got into any MOBAs, but I will say that despite how disconnected these genres seem, Overture mixes their mechanics together pretty smoothly. Using mana to unlock more moves for your character makes each match have a real sense of progression where you need to decide if you should give up some tempo with buying serpents in order to buy an important ability or item for your character. But these extra moves you buy go into your item slots, so you have to weigh if the item you're buying is more valuable than an item you could have in that slot instead. Do I want to give up my bombs for the DPS buff Dragon Install brings? Hell yeah, I would. DI looks a little different in Overture. Honestly, I kinda prefer this design over the newer one. I'll admit that it doesn't look great in-game, but the concept art and design itself is great. It's a lot more reminiscent of what other gears look like, with its armored flesh and teeth. Also, Dragon and Soul enjoyers rejoice. It's actually good in this game, although it's a little weird. Soul is a unique resource called Gears that you get from your servants, I think, that powers up Dragon Install. At 25 Gears he gets a small damage and attack speed boost. At 50 he gets a huge damage boost. And I mean huge. This combo needs the 10% tension to activate Dragon Install, and then it builds the meter to do Volcanic Viper at the end. It deals 506 damage. For reference, characters have 500 health at the max, it's a touch of death. At 100, you get the transformation that entirely changes the properties of his moveset. More hits, different moves, and most importantly, huge AoE hitboxes. This makes it great for clearing hordes of servants, but it doesn't give the damage boost that the 50 gear version does. That combo from before, it does 425 damage now. So each version has its own use case, whether you need high single target damage for masters or ghosts, or horde control for armies of servants. The roster of characters might seem a bit odd. There's 7 playable characters, but most are new faces making their debut. The only characters returning from older titles are Sol, Kai, and Raven? I always thought he originated from this game before becoming playable in Revelator, but it turns out he actually debuts in one of the novels and appears in a couple arcade endings of Guilty Gear X and XX. Man, they really couldn't settle on a design for this guy. But regardless, fan-favorite legacy characters like May, Faust, and Potemkin are nowhere to be seen. Apparently Sega had the rights to most of the characters at the time, so Oxus had to come up with some new cast members. Some of these went on to become series mainstays, such as Sin, but some have never made appearances since. Each character fills a certain role or archetype to fit your playstyle. Sol might have pretty mediocre minions, but that doesn't matter because he is an absolute powerhouse on his own. Kai might have great pressure against other masters, but he struggles with hordes of minions. I'm sure in the 2v2 mode, you and your teammate could pick masters that cover each other's weaknesses, but unsurprisingly, the online is dead, and going off this review made less than a year after release, it's been a ghost town for a long time. Yeah, this game sold horribly. Guilty Gear wasn't popular worldwide yet, and it was too different from the fighting games for most fans to be interested. There is a community Discord server, but I'm too scared to ask for matches there, so instead I'm gonna play the single player campaign. The campaign opens with...
Old man, are you still doing that?
I did not know this game had a dub. It's set to English by default and it caught me off guard. I was drinking water when I started and I almost spat it out over my keyboard. It's got a lot of the usual suspects you'd see in 2000s video game and anime dubs. Troy Baker, Dave Wittenberg, Wendy Lee, and get this, Yuri Lowenthal voices 2 characters. And then he went on to voice Bedman. It's pretty corny. Not terrible, but it ain't great either, so I switched to Japanese after the first couple missions. Funnily enough, this is the first game in the series where Daisuke Ishiwatari does not voice Sol, instead being voiced by Joji Nakata, who still voices him to this day. Mission 0 follows Sin and Sol training. This is just a tutorial for the general combat mechanics. Overture makes an attempt to port over mechanics from the other games, though obviously they aren't one-to-one. Modern cancels are just red Roman cancels, but they only cost 20% meter, and you can Cyclone Blast for 35%, which is basically just burst. And the game tells you this by making you beat up Sin. After that, Mission 1 is... shit. Alright, I don't usually talk about technical problems, but there was just a few too many to ignore. Crashes, endless loading screens, and one time I went into training and the map just didn't load. Of course, this is a game from 2007, a bit of jank as expected, but it does show how shoddy of a port this is. Okay, Mission 1 is surprisingly just a cutscene. Yeah, this game has 20 missions, but 3 of them are just cutscenes with no gameplay, so really there's only 17. Gears have started disappearing for an unknown reason, and the kingdom of Illyria comes under siege. Kai calls for his gods to contact Sol as he feels that this incident will affect more than just the kingdom. Off in The Nightmare Before Christmas, Sin spots a wanted poster, Kai's way of calling for Sol, which I only bring up because I thought it was kinda cool seeing how the characters would contact each other before they just made magic phones a thing instead. Then some dudes just spawn in so you can fight something. Sol hears a voice in his head which teaches him about the basic game mechanics. These first couple missions basically just serve as an explanation for the MOBA systems. I actually really like this approach, teaching the game in little increments across multiple missions as opposed to just info dumping in a tutorial. Learning a mechanic, then applying it, then learning more mechanics in a similar manner lets the designers slowly expand the scope of the game without making it feel overwhelming for a player early on. It teaches you about ghosts, servants, and master ghosts before ending in a chase sequence to explain the whack-as-hell sprinting. Izuna reveals himself to be a creature from the backyard, which for those who don't follow the lore, the backyard is a bit complicated, but Daisuke Ishiwatari has likened it to the relationship between a game and the computer. If the universe is a game, the backyard is the disk with all its information. It's also where magic and shit comes from. Izuna says that these enemies have been appearing and attacking any gears they encounter and are the ones behind the siege in Illyria. Now knowing why Kai called for him, Sol sets out for the kingdom. Luckily, Izuna can just teleport them closer because writing travel segments is hard and it's easier just to drag and drop characters to where they need to be. But we gotta stop at his place to use his portal. Once there, some of his gear friends get mind controlled, which only Justice should be able to do. But Justice is dead, so who's doing this? Anyway, you need to run past all his dudes and destroy this gate at the end. This mission is like 2 minutes long tops, and it's just to explain that you can pick up servants like items. Once you get to Illyria, a woman named Valentine shows up, and this is where I'm going to give a spoiler warning. If you care about spoilers in a 16-year-old game, in a series that I would not recommend for its story, now is the time to get out. Alright, so for a bit of context, Sol and Arya were lovers, and then one of their colleagues, that man, turned them into gears as like a joke or something. Arya becomes Justice, a tyrannical gear that waged war on humanity by controlling every single gear produced after her, and Sol, being a prototype gear and thus immune to her control, had to kill Justice, and by proxy, Arya. Now in the current time, the Valentine units are genetic copies of Arya created in the backyard. Now you think Sol, confronted with someone who looks identical to his dead partner, with the power to control gears like Justice could, would say something about it. Or at least it would be brought up later or something. But nope, he keeps his mouth shut right until the end of the game. It makes sense, Sol is more of the quiet type, and I don't think we actually knew what Arya looked like when this game released, so they were probably setting it up as a reveal for later. But not mentioning that Valentine looks exactly like your dead wife makes all of their battles lack the emotional weight that they really should have, at least outside of retrospect. Anyway, you have to fight her. This is the first real battle of the game. You don't have all the mechanics yet, like the organ menu, but it's set on a map with multiple paths and points to control. It's the first test of map control in Master v Master combat. It's a little slow because you can't summon your own servants manually, but it works. Anyway, she calls you weak and says something about a key before leaving. In Illyria Castle, Kai is trapped in a stasis seal, but more importantly, that man's henchman, Raven, is there, confirming the Gearmaker's involvement. So there's a boss fight with Raven. It's basically just a monster battle with some unique attacks and a bigger health bar. He has a gimmick where you can get his needles and stun him, but I'm not sure on the specifics of how it works, I just kinda hit him till I won. You know, considering that he's the first real boss, and this is Raven's first major appearance in a mainline game, I thought he'd be a bit more important, but after this fight we don't see him again until after the credits. It's interesting though, I don't think we knew about Raven's immortality until a year later when the art book released, but they definitely had it all planned in advance. How do I know that? Well, through his theme. Oh yeah, I can't understand it either, I'll put some subtitles up. Vocals are just a really natural fit for Guilty Gear. Injecting a bit of the character's story into the music is a great way to bring the character and the soundtrack, and by extension the game, closer together. After beating him, you have to clean up some of the gears invading Illyria. It's just another normal match against Valentine, though you have most options for battle now. You can't summon all 7 types, but you can use the organ for basically everything else, like commanding them around the map. I guess I'll talk about her, though. Valentine is boring. She's an emotionless doll that hasn't learned to be human, only ever speaking in her monotone voice to explain her motives. She's not a very interesting villain, and I guess that's the point, but I don't know, I would have rathered something more unique. Back to Kai, Sol can't figure out how to break the seal, but Izuna knows a guy who could, so he sends you off to meet Dr. Paradigm, a new addition to the series. Paradigm is an intelligent gear who lives on an archipelago with other gears away from humanity. Sol and Paradigm are initially opposed to working together because of their hatred of gears and humans respectively, but they settle their differences by beating the shit out of each other. Paradigm explains that inside the backyard, that man created a cube, a place where he could harness its power to alter reality. Going back to that game and disc analogy, this is like the dev console with SV cheats enabled. Then Valentine shows up because she wants a way into the cube. I'm starting to notice a pattern. You'll do something, then Valentine shows up inexplicably and you have to fight her. This mission is pretty miserable. You're teamed with Paradigm and you lose if he goes down, but his AI is kinda pathetic and dies really easily, so I found rushing Valentine before Paradigm even gets the chance to die was most effective. This is also a bit of a smaller issue, but I wish the enemy monsters were more of an active threat during the campaign. They just kinda sit at their Master Ghost until you get close to them. Anyway, Paradigm says that he could break the seal, but we have to get some of his research that he hid at Izuna's place. You have to run around and find locations shown in an image to reveal a hidden chest. Izuna doesn't want you killing his homies though, so you aren't allowed to fight anything. I respect them for experimenting, but damn this mission sucks. Trying to find these areas is already hard enough because we've never explored this map before, and half the areas look the same. But these dudes slapping the hell out of you while you're just trying to open a chest is especially irritating. Even more so because you don't naturally heal and navigating around the enemies while sprinting feels terrible. So we get his garbage and go back to Illyria. He breaks the seal on Kai and Sin gets pissed off because he has daddy issues, so he storms out. Paradigm confronts Kai about supposedly hiding the Maiden of the Grove within Illyria, which how the hell does he know that? Does he just have like a gear radar in his head? He accuses Kai of wanting to use her as a weapon. Now of course this isn't true, the reason she's here is because Kai has fallen in love with her and had a kid. This is meant to be the big reveal that Dizzy and Kai got together and that Sin is their child. But it's been 16 years, I'd actually be more surprised if someone managed to play this game without knowing that already. It's also kind of funny that they never call her Dizzy, presumably because of the licensing issues. But imagine referring to your wife as the Maiden of the Grove instead of, her name. Dizzy has started dissolving or whatever, so Kai used the Thunder Seal to lock her in stasis before she dies. Apparently Valentine needs the gear cells from Justice to access the cube. That's the key she was talking about. Well, Dizzy is a gear created by Justice, so she has the cells, and that's why Valentine invaded Illyria. You know who else has Justice's gear cells? Sin. But oops, he just ran off by himself. Something of note is that Valentine's servants talk like they fear death and whatnot, which is weird to think about. Do they have emotion? Can they feel pain? Jeez. Sorry, little buddy. There's something I want to bring up with Sin. He has a unique follow-up to Beak Driver, creating an explosion that launches enemies caught in it. I just thought it was interesting that Sin always has a follow-up to Beak, but it's different in every game. Sin and Izuna run after him, and Kai and Paradigm stay behind to defend the throne room. At this point the game is totally diverged from its core design. The missions don't follow the MOBA and RTS formula anymore, instead opting for smaller levels with different ideas. Kai and Paradigm play a tower defense mission where you have to prevent the gate from being destroyed. Though they bring in a unique mechanic, many of the enemies are brainwashed gears from Paradigm's archipelago, so you have to be wary not to kill them. But you can stun them using Kai's lightning, and then command Paradigm to dispel the mind control, bringing them to your side of the fight. It's a fun gimmick, I really like this mission. It helps that the storm is a great backdrop for finally getting to play as the lightning dude, and the hands down best rendition of Holy Orders is playing. Overture's original soundtrack is really good, but it's a Guilty Gear game that almost goes without saying. I did rag on this game's graphics earlier, but at least the art direction is solid all around. I really like how the lower part of Illyria floods a little. It's a small detail, but it goes a long way. Sol and Izuna find Sin just as Valentine captures him, so they follow her. Izuna decides to fight because of reasons that probably got lost in translation.
その友達がこれ以上なく困ってる時に戦わない奴は臆病者というよりささみチキンだ。ささみチキン
What the fuck are you talking about? This mission is the closest the game returns to the core mechanics, but your goal isn't an enemy Master Ghost, it's just full map control. At least, I think that's what you needed to do. The goal is breaking these barriers, which you do by capturing ghosts. I don't know if you need all of them or what, but after getting them all and running around for a bit, the mission ended, so yeah, works out. Hardly matters because we're too late and Sin gets brainwashed, which gives him this sick color palette. Why would they ever make an alt color based off this? It looks rad. You know how before you needed to dispel the brainwashing on Paradigm's buddies? Yeah, well, violence seems to do the trick too. It's pretty standard stuff. You fight him as he airs his grievances about his father and whatnot. After coming back to his senses, he asks if his mother is safe. Sol tells him that she is, but only because Kai did everything in his power to save her. So yeah, Sin doesn't hate his dad as much anymore. Alright, we chase after Valentine. Again. But she's amassed a gigantic army using the backyard's power. But it's okay, because Kai followed us with the forces of Illyria by his side. This is meant to be the emotional peak of the game. Guilty Gear 2 Overture, at its core, is about family, and beating dudes up, and occasionally those things overlap. Wait a minute, this is the moment where Sin and Kai get on at least okay terms with each other, but honestly, I'm too busy watching these two NPCs fight in the background. Go Guy in Blue! This mission is completely nuts. I would try and explain what's going on, but the truth is I can hardly tell myself. It's gone full Muso game, just utter chaos. It doesn't help that the audio is just as incomprehensible. I do like how they duck the audio when someone talks. Even they knew that the sound design would drown out anything important. So after that sensory overload, Sin and Kai kinda repair their relationship. It's a nice moment. Look, even those two background enemies have stopped fighting.
Do you think love can bloom, even on a battlefield?
Sin runs off after the rest of the gang, who find the gate that Valentine used to escape to the backyard. Though, instead of closing, it opens again. And that man comes forth. Damn, he was a lot more intimidating before we knew he was just some twink. We all know that man is not a physical fighter, so how would a boss fight with him work? It's a bullet hell, accurately predicting what playing against Test Case 3 would feel like. This fight kinda sucks. Gunflame doesn't cost meter here, so you just spam it until he drops the shield, and then wail on him. It's a pretty basic loop for a pretty uninteresting fight. I normally love bullet hells, but this fight just isn't it. Add this to his list of war crimes. He says that Valentine is going to use the cube to wipe out humanity. Ooh, why would she do that? I bet there's a real interesting motive there. Anyway, that man grants us passage to the backyard. Weird for him to be helping us, but we don't have time to think about that. We gotta go kill Valentine. I always imagined the backyard would be a kind of ethereal place beyond comprehension. But no, it's actually just hell. In the backyard, she started opening the cube, and once she finds that you've come to stop her, she stops being so boring and learns her first emotion. Anger. She gets pissed and turns into a gear, a dark copy of justice. Honestly, I don't see the resemblance, but it's what the wiki says, so let's roll with it. Sol runs off to stop the cube from opening while the others fight her head on. Why does the camera keep clipping into the floor? This fight is almost like a raid boss, being able to command your party to do stuff like put up a shield for projectiles as the boss runs around and spawns ads. There's items scattered around so it never becomes overwhelming, but it does take a while. She's got a lot of health. I really wish these missions with multiple characters would let you pick who you play as, like those DMC5 missions do, so you could pick between Izuna, Sin, and the third one that nobody picks. It's pretty befitting that the final boss would be just as unique and chaotic as the rest of the game. Once Sol dispels the key, Valentine just despairs and gives up, but then she starts to self-destruct, so everyone leaves. Overall, the campaign was... Nah, it doesn't end like that. She turns into a fucking near-boss. You have to chase her down as she just floods the screen with projectiles and particle effects. There's no way in hell this ran properly on a 360. And once you climb on, you have to battle the robot pod on an exposed platform. You have to be careful though, because some attacks will knock you off and you'll have to chase after her again. All while some of the best music in the series plays. This song actually starts a leitmotif that is used in the themes of all of the other Valentine units from here on out. I don't know music theory, so I can't go into much detail, but I do know that it's cool as hell. If you get hit by one of these orbs, Sol starts tripping balls and gets tormented by a bunch of copies of Valentine. Now, I've got a lot of problems with this segment. The first is that we don't know that Valentine looks like Arya yet, so emotionally it has no weight. And the other is that you take no damage when you get sent here, and it's just on a timer, so you can run away until you get back to the fight. There's no reason to engage the Valentines because it's just an unnecessary risk. There's also some stuff in the distance that I ran out to. I'm not sure why, but there's a bunch of chests in here. Once you take down the robot, you have to fight Valentine's soul one-on-one. But when this first happened, I thought it was just another one of those timed segments, and it took a while for me to realize I should fight her. Which sucks, because otherwise this would be a really cool segment, confronting Soul with the visage of his dead wife. But these technical problems just take away from what is otherwise a really cool boss fight, which is a real shame, because this fight is sick. After destroying Valentine, Soul is trapped in a white space inside the backyard. He finally mentions that Valentine looked identical to Arya, but that man assures him that Arya is dead, and he was not involved with the creation of Valentine. After vowing to one day kill that man, Sol is sent back to reality, and they never tried to revive Justice again. This part in the credits is hilarious. Izuna says, "If you ever need me again, just call," but then he never makes an appearance in another title. Aside from the pachinko machine, but come on, that doesn't count. The overall story was a bit odd, but it's Guilty Gear, the lore never makes sense anyway. It did lay the foundation for a lot of the story in the future games. The whole idea of Valentine's learning to understand emotion would later form the basis for Ramlethal's entire character. And all that stuff about Sol and Arya took over a decade to get resolved. Kinda. There was an art book released the next year called Guilty Gear 2 Overture Material Collection, and it contains one short story for each character. It's a pretty good read, going into stuff like Kai's decision to let Sol raise Sin, the creation of Valentine, and how Raven discovered his immortality. You know that spike in Raven's head? That's from an attempt to take his own life that failed due to his immortality. It's interesting because that's the only consistent design choice for him across all the games. It's also got some pretty sweet illustrations that... It's him again. Okay, I need to go on a tangent because this dude is interesting. This is Chamaki, and according to the series director, he's the mascot for Guilty Gear. Despite this, there's a good chance you've never seen him before. He only ever really appears as an Easter egg, or in niche titles nobody cares about. But once you know about him, you might start seeing him everywhere, like May's backpack in Strive is based off him. Apparently he would show up in Revelator lobbies, but I've never seen it. In Strive you can get him as furniture though. He has lore as well. I don't know where it comes from because the wiki cites no sources, but apparently he was part of an anti-terrorist task force on the nation of... Hapone? What do you mean he's 4'1"? No he fucking isn't. Okay, I'm getting way off track here, back to the game. Guilty Gear 2 Overture is such an interesting experiment of a game. It feels so unique, and has a gameplay style that I still haven't really seen elsewhere. It did feel like the game was having an identity crisis every few missions, and never got to fully explore its own ideas before moving on to the next. It's interesting though, the campaign almost feels like little vignettes from different genres, like short snapshots from games that don't exist. Some work great, and others not so much. It's a cool game, a really interesting product from back when small studios were just trying random stuff and seeing what worked. But I can't really call it a good game. It has too many flaws, underexplored ideas, and just overall clunkiness. But on that same coin, I wouldn't call it bad. It's a 5 out of 10 that I found really fascinating. I think the game's biggest strength is its biggest weakness. It's unique. An action RTS MOBA hybrid is something that only appeals to a really small group of people. But if that interests you, check this game out. And if it doesn't, then you're not missing anything crazy. It does make me wish that they kept experimenting with the IP, because after the 2000s they haven't done much aside from fighting games, and I don't blame them. Arxis is just too good at making fighting games, so sticking to their strength is probably the best move. But Guilty Gear has a really cool world, and I'd love to see some other genres get explored, like a hack and slash or something. You know what? Fuck it. Make another genre smoothie. Once they stop with all these spin-offs, I want Guilty Gear 3 to be a sandbox kart racer with a style meter and Souls-like level design, and I'm not kidding!